I'm the sixth state climatologist for Arizona, and I think I'm the only state climatologist that was born and raised here. So I feel, a particularly strong sense of service to my state. One of the things, now we're going to talk about some of the things that I do and some of the resources that are available. But one of the things that I manage is a weather station that's on the campus of ASU. It's right by Tempe Town Lake. And it's been installed in that location, in and around that location, for about 40 years. So it's a good source of data. And in fact, Tempe Town Lake uses our data because we have a unique instrument in that weather station. It's one of only 5 of these evaporation pans installed in the state of Arizona. And we actually measure how much evaporation comes out of an open surface. And so it's a very important tool that the city of Tempe uses to manage how much water is evaporating out of Tempe Town Lake. The other thing that we do is we're also measuring precipitation. So on Saturday, as folks in the valley probably were aware, and a little bit on Sunday, we had a good walloping of precipitation on Saturday. So we report that. It goes into our data. It goes immediately to the National Weather Service. You can check how much precipitation happened right there at Tempe. And in fact, the city of Tempe is running the Ironman experience contest this weekend, and they had to shut down and not allow people to swim in the lake because they had to monitor turbidity, because they had 0.35 inches of precipitation at our weather station. So all of those different kinds of things are connections. Those are ways that we can serve, my office can serve, that I can serve you. And it's just a very unique way to think about that. A lot of folks, making those connections, I think will find valuable. So we'll go ahead, and I did want to show this to you. This is pretty exciting when we're looking at how much precipitation we've received since the start of the water year. I just wanted to give that terminology to folks. If you're not familiar with what a water year is, it's how we manage water, not just in Arizona. That's the phrasing and the term and the calendar that we use to manage water all across the United States. And our water year starts October 1st. So last year's water year, which would have been water year 2022, ended September 30th. And October 1st, we start looking at our water, how much we're getting. October is usually a drier month climatologically in Arizona. But to see how much precipitation we've been getting all across the state has been tremendous. And so what you're looking at here is a map that gives you a sense as to how much more precipitation we've received since October 1st this year. So it's just looking at that short period of time, a little bit more than 2 weeks, and just getting a sense as to how much above average this is. So really, really grateful. We look at our climate outlooks to see if we're still going to be wet, and it looks like we might still continue to be wet in October, but we'll take every drop that we can get. But I was just really excited to see this. You're seeing some tremendous precipitation amounts. A little bit of background about the state climatologist, and as Anne was mentioning, Nancy Sullivan was preceding me, and I'm after Nancy, and as number 6 of the state climatologists. The state climatologists are appointed by the governor. And this is usual in most states across the country. Some states handle their state climatologists a little bit differently than others, but most of the time you're going to get an appointment from the governor. And this started in 1973. So that's when the National Weather Service essentially said, we need this task filled by the states. We're going to make sure that it's managed. And that's when we started our state climatologists here at ASU in Arizona. So as I mentioned, born and raised here, and just thrilled to be in this position. It's largely a position of service, research, support, and I wear a lot of hats. And so I'm going to show a lot of the different opportunities, hopefully, that are available for you. And here's a little bit about some of the output the research, the things that I do. Ellen knows that I do a lot of outreach, so I'm always interested in supporting that aspect of our communities. I think it's really important for folks to understand what climate is, how climate operates, and how the temperature changes throughout the day is one of the very basic things that I like to talk about. And so, starting at that level, I talk to, second graders, high schoolers, I'll talk to community groups at a variety of different levels, however I can reach as many people as possible. And I'm happy to do that with your groups as well. But you can see that we also do research. I am the co-chair of the Drought Monitoring Technical Committee. So you're going to see some information on droughts coming up. And bringing that information forward, I think, is essential in understanding our water supply, where our water comes from, what it means to get snow, what it means to get a heavy monsoon season, all of those things. We're also going to see a lot of maps. All three of my degrees are in geography. And in fact, all of our state climatologists are geographers. I am a climatologist. The specific type of climatologist I am is a hydroclimatologist, which means I study water. And I also study the urban heat island. And so as a climatologist and as a geographer, we use maps to find patterns. And so that's what you're going to see quite a bit. That's how we think about these ideas. That's how we solve problems, is spatially across space, finding those patterns where things are and why they're happening there. As we were talking about earlier with Flagstaff and where that water is running off and where you might need to have it go. Those things are very geographic, and that's how we think as geographers and as climatologists. So a lot of different things that are available to you. But here comes the drought information. So I wanted to let everyone know that the state, various stakeholders, agencies are evaluating drought frequently. So we, at the state level, are working at the federal level to evaluate drought every week. And that would be considered our short-term drought. That's what the U.S. Drought Monitor will publish. We'll work together to assist the author of the Drought Monitor map. And that comes out every week. So we're evaluating drought every week. Every month, we're looking at what's going on with our drought status, writing a report, publishing that report, making sure we have an idea of what's happening. And then we meet every quarter. So every 3 months, we're coming together. We just did that recently, looking at what's going on with short-term drought, looking at what's going on with long-term drought. So my office will make these long-term drought maps that you're seeing here that look at a little bit longer term of what's happening in our climate system. And then biannually, we'll meet twice a year. And this will be a larger group. And this will come together with the director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and we'll discuss the status as to what's happened in the last 6 months with our water supply, what we expect to have happen, and we'll put together a recommendation for the governor about where we think the status of our drought might be. So that's what we do, and that's available, and it's open to the public. I would encourage everyone to come and join us in those meetings. But it is important to understand when we talk about drought, especially after we've had a nice wet monsoon season and it's continuing, we're getting that great precipitation. When we're looking at that, then it's important to kind of understand what goes into our drought evaluations. I'm going to stop for a second and just look in chat to make sure I'm not missing any questions. And I am not. So thank you very much for allowing me to do that. And then what I'm going to kind of describe is how we evaluate drought. It's more than just lack of precipitation. But I did create kind of a way to kind of look at where we are. We evaluate our long-term drought based on starting in about the mid 1990s. So 1993 was a heavy, intense year, lots of precipitation. That's when Gillespie Dam failed. And so there was a lot of precipitation. And then 94, it dried out. And so then, drought is one of those challenging variables to assess. How do you know if you're in a drought until you've had a few years that are dry? And so Arizona, our state, acted very quickly and put forward drought information and identified that we were in drought very, very early. And it's been kind of going on since that time. And one of the ways to look at that is to look at, okay, so what's going on with our water year? How much annual precipitation do we have across the state for our water year? And again, a water year runs October 1st to September 30th. And just getting one number that shows us the amount of precipitation for the state for that year. And so we're looking here at those numbers, and you can kind of see, I kind of created a table that shows, we did have some wet years since 1994. We've had some wet years, but overall we've had dry years. And if you wanted to look at those numbers, like some years are wet, we have a surplus. A lot of years are dry, we have a deficit. If you just do the math on those numbers, then you can see that we are still in quite that deficit of precipitation. Now, as I mentioned, drought is more than lack of precipitation. So, that's just one way to kind of get a quick look at, where we stand. What we also evaluate is that map that you're seeing that's kind of orange and yellow and red. And that's showing us the SPEI index, which is the Standardized Precipitation Evapotranspiration Index. So it takes into account how much precipitation we've received over periods of time. What we're looking here are at the last 72 months, looking at the precipitation that we've received. But we also then calculate that based on how thirsty the atmosphere was during that time. So that's the evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration is an idea of how much water the atmosphere wants, how thirsty the atmosphere is. And it's based on what's going on with our temperatures. So as temperatures go up, the atmosphere becomes thirstier, and then we're not able to satisfy that no matter how much precipitation we may receive. So those are absolutely some of the ways that we look at and try to evaluate what's going on with our long-term drought here in Arizona. But here's something that I'm sure most of you are familiar with, is what's been going on with our temperature in Arizona. So if we look at our period of record, so how long have we had instruments to measure temperatures in Arizona? They go back to about 1895. And so we can get a long-term trend with our temperatures. And we can see that we've had about a 2-degree Fahrenheit temperature change over the last 100 years or so. But what you can also see is that there's been an increase in the last 30 years. In climatology, we look at what are called climate norms, which is a 30-year average. And so that kind of gives us a wider view, a longer view. And when we're looking at the last 30 years, you can see that temperatures have been increasing. And what we're looking at is one number that represents the temperature across the state for that particular year. And so the January to December, a calendar year, looking at one number that represents what has happened across the entire state for that year. And you can see that there's a change, that it's been increasing, and the trend is about 0.5 to about 0.7 degrees Fahrenheit increase every decade. So we're seeing that continually moving. I did want to bring to your attention that there are some interesting drought tools available to you at drought.gov. So if you go to drought.gov and you go up at the top of their website, you can see they have data and maps by sector, but I wanted to bring your attention to by location. So if you go to by location, you can put a zip code in and it'll zoom you into data specific for your location. It's a little lagged, so it's not going to give you data from yesterday, for example, but it's a couple of days lagged. It's still fairly current information. And so you can get a sense as to what's going on with temperature, what's going on with precipitation, but you can also take a look at kind of those trends overall, looking at comparing temperatures to what our 30-year norms look like, or a 30-day norm. So you can get a sense as to what's happening with temperature and precipitation in your area. And I did want to bring that to your attention. The other opportunity that I encourage everyone who is able to observe their precipitation. So that means taking a rain gauge that costs about $10 or so and installing it in and around your backyard, near your office, wherever there's space for a rain gauge where we can measure precipitation. We absolutely look at observations that are being entered on a daily basis from citizen scientists. And it's really important when we're looking at precipitation to have all of that dense network represented, because as you know, when we're looking at, or maybe not, let me tell you, if it doesn't get in a rain gauge and it doesn't get into our climate record, it's like it never happened. So we really want to have those observations of precipitation as much as we possibly can. And so it's a 24-hour observation. The instrument is installed, you go out and you check how much precipitation occurred the previous 24 hours, and you post it that morning. And then you reset your gauge, which means you dump out the water, hopefully into your plants, and then you start over again. Really essential, really important, and I encourage everyone who has interest, availability, who can do this. This can happen in elementary schools, high schools, all over the place, definitely. It's called COCOROS, that's how you say it. It's an acronym, which I'm not even going to try and guess on. Oh, there it is, Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. I have to have the little helper there, but absolutely, I encourage everyone to take advantage of that. And also take advantage of me as a resource. I'm happy to come talk with your groups, happy to talk to whatever those might happen to be. So they may be schools, they may be agencies, they may be the folks you work with in your office. I'm happy to do that. I think it's important to understand kind of some of those things that we see and that we experience, like clouds. It gets hot, it gets cold, but how does that happen? And I'm happy to talk about very specific things as well. So drought, rain, flood, all of those big things that happen here in Arizona, happy to do so. So I encourage everyone to check mark that and use me as a resource for your group. And the last little bit here is some of the resources available to you as my website and my Twitter account. I try and put those things forward. We get a lot of information, and I want to make sure that this is valid information, that it's something that folks can understand, that they can consume. And I'm really interested in making sure that that information gets put forward. And so I use these resources. Of course, if you can't find something on the website, you can always contact me. We can have a conversation. We can see if we can find something. But you'll see that if you go to the website, you'll have resources for maps, for data, for background information on what happens in Arizona with our weather and climate. So there's that. And then I have a question for everyone that hopefully we can have a discussion about. I also, one of the hats that I wear is serving counties with the FEMA hazard mitigating plans. And so we'll go in and evaluate what's happening with drought, what's happening with temperature. We'll look at flood, those kinds of things that are important for those 5-year FEMA plans. And I know that there are a lot of communities that are putting forward climate plans, they're putting forward drought plans. And I'm wondering if anyone has any interest in me kind of assisting, overlooking, kind of as a background information. I'd like to have that discussion. So I'm going to go to the next page so you can get my contact information and we can have a conversation.